We have Joel Patterson with us today. Joel Patterson is the founder of the Vested Group, a technology service provider. They're focused on the licensing, implementation, and support of a modern cloud-based ERP, CRM, and e-commerce solution. And I'm sure he's going to explain all about what that means for growing companies called Oracle plus NetSuite. He has over 20 years of experience in the consulting industry and has worked with premier firms, including Arthur Andersen and Capgemini. Joel earned his degree in business administration from Baylor University and currently resides in Lucas, Texas. All right, today Joel's going to be homing in on that topic of ERP systems, which is enterprise resources planning systems, what they are, what they can do for your organization, and what to look for in an implementation partner. So welcome, Joel. I also wanted to remind everyone that this is an interactive session. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see there's a chat and a Q&A button. Facebook viewers, you have the comment section. Make sure to use those as we go. We're happy to answer questions. And like I said, it is an interactive session. And then I always get the question, this will be recorded and it will be sent out again at the end. So Joel, without further ado, take it away.
Thank you, Leah. Happy to be here and look forward to sharing a little bit of ERP experience and background with you guys, but really that introduction is exactly why we need presentations like this, because the industry that I'm in happens to be very confusing. Some would call it boring, but it is something that can honestly really change the trajectory of an organization and is an important piece of the puzzle. So what I'm going to do today is talk a little bit about what that means, what ERP means, how you might go about a selection of a system, a partner, what you need to think about long-term, and then answer any questions that you've got. Not going to be able to really talk through every detail of an ERP selection and implementation during a lunch and learn kind of thing, but I can certainly answer any questions that I don't get to today as a follow-up. All right, so let's jump in. From an agenda perspective, pretty simple. I'm just going to credentialize a little bit here in a minute, just give you a little bit of my background. We will teach you how to spell ERP and what that means. Selections, what I mean here is how do you choose software and how do you choose services? What can go wrong in an implementation and how to make sure that it goes well. What do you do with ongoing support? And then some final takeaways as you leave. All right, so my journey and how I got to I guess being the resident expert on ERP really started in 1997. So I went to work with Arthur Andersen in their consulting division, way pre-Enron and everything else in 1997, and I learned something called Oracle. And with Oracle, it kind of brought me into this entire world of what it means to be able to implement enterprise software. Because really, it's not just a single piece of software that you're implementing it for the entire organization. And I think that's where a lot of companies get off track a little bit because they're expecting some different kinds of wins. When everything is so interconnected, it takes a little bit of time to get to that point. And I'll explain that and what I mean by that here in just a minute. After Arthur Andersen, I was there about 4 years doing ERP work the whole time. I went to Capgemini, and then I started my first firm in 2001 with a couple of other guys doing ERP implementations, mostly Oracle, what was called e-business suite. Oracle grew over time and acquired companies like JD Edwards, Hyperion, PeopleSoft, and those all became part of their portfolio, and we would expand our business as part of that. And then in 2002, we implemented a software package called NetLedger to run that business. And the reason I mention that is because that's what I do now. So I started the Vested Group in 2011, and all that we do is work with a cloud product called Oracle NetSuite. And I've been, like I was saying here, it used to be called NetLedger. In 2002 is when I first started using it. So I've been a user of it for almost 20 years now. And the system was only started in 1998, or the company was only started in 1998. So I've been around most of the time, really like the software, and that's what led me to where I am today. And the final thing I'll mention on my background is I also wrote a book called The Big Commitment. And it's a business fiction about a company going through an ERP implementation. It's a very simple read. If you read The Goal or anything like that, or 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, it's similar in style. But at each chapter, we go into the detail of what you might be able to learn from the lesson from that chapter and really just give you some of the basics around how to go through one of these projects successfully. I always tell people it's not easy, or it's simple, but it's not easy. I mean, I can lay out the steps for you, but actually getting people motivated and going. I mean, I'm a Petra client, and so you guys, for the Petra people on the call, you know exactly what I'm talking about and everything that you do every day. Getting people to actually adopt the program is the hardest part, and we're the same. All right, so moving on from here. So ERP myths and legends. Oftentimes when people talk about ERP, it's a horror story. And just like with any other negative review, 10 people are going to talk about their negative experience versus the ones that were actually happy. And a lot of the things that you see, I'm just going to go ahead and build this slide, and you can kind of see some of these quotes. These are actual quotes taken off the internet, but I've seen way worse. And really the point here is that from the time that ERP really started, which I would say like, early 90s to where we are now, there was a lot of growth and maturity that would take place within the software. And so when we were doing implementations in 1997, we would spend, I'm not even kidding when I say this, 40 to 50% of our time just fixing bugs. The system would show up back in the days when you get disks with, the install disks like this, and then another packet that was about half as big with patches. So, I mean, the software was not stable. That's putting it mildly. And thus we spent a lot of our time trying to sort of fix and massage it. And unfortunately, that led to a lot of bad press. There's always going to be firms out there that might not do the best job. And unfortunately, that was running rampant in the 90s and the early aughts. So a lot of the myths and the legends that you see are really dated. These days, the systems, at least the systems that we work with, very stable. We have tons of support customers that have already gone live, and I'll talk about this in a minute. We don't spend our time fixing bugs or applying patches. It's all about value add stuff for the client these days. So it's a much different world, and you're going to continue to hear these myths and legends, but just take them not with a grain of salt, but just recognize the context. All right, so what exactly is ERP? Even when we were logging on for the call, I was talking to Leah, and she said she had to do a search for what ERP is because nobody knows. It actually stands for Enterprise Resource Planning. It was coined by Gartner a long time ago, and it really spun out of the success that they were having with MRP, or Material Requirements Planning. So that was when people could take their inventory, take their sales orders, look at how long a lead time it would take for inventory to arrive, and come up with a plan for their inventory. That was MRP. Well, when MRP became really popular, people thought, wow, what if we took all of that same data and put our financials on it and had our order taking in there and everything coming together? And so instead of coming up with a brand new term, they just adopted the MRP kind of acronym, and it thus became Enterprise Resource Planning. But truthfully, it means nothing these days. Nobody really, ERP is a term, but nobody really understands where it came from. But what it really is software to run all the functions of your business. Think of it as simple as that. If I've got a wholesale distribution company, I'm going to need all of the accounting. I might need fixed assets to be able to depreciate my buildings. I might need inventory to store all of the inventory I've got on site, as well as stuff that might be consigned from another vendor, stuff that I don't actually own, but I still need to know quantity. There's all these other little intricacies that go into every business, as everyone on this call is well aware. And what ERP allows you to do is get all of that in one place, and you're not fighting the data integration issues or the latency issues. You've got it all in one place, and you can report actionable data from within that structure. Often the changes in this industry have been as part of a disruption in the architecture. So for example, started out on mainframes, and then we were doing NT servers, and then we've got obviously Unix boxes and Linux boxes. And as everything would change, and we go to maybe hosting or co-locating, as we called it at one point, and then we'd call it just on the internet, and now it's the cloud. Through each one of those major phases, ERP software has changed along with it. So a lot of the times when you see new releases come out, they're tied to those architecture changes, but they also include a lot of new functionality, a new way of structuring the database, perchance. So there's just a lot of different things that go into that. But there have been some major evolutions over the last 20 years. The good thing is that where we are right now, with everything being run on the cloud, there's really nothing else that's as significant as maybe from a mainframe to client server architecture. So where we are right now, this is really a 20-year decision. So if you are thinking about implementing a new ERP or looking at a new ERP, you can really think of this in 20-year terms. Now, that doesn't mean that you're not going to have other things going on there. I don't want to promise that, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But these are long-term decisions, not just a 5 or 8 year one. And here's some common publishers. SAP is the big dog that everybody knows about out of Germany. Great system, very large, very structured, very rigid. Takes an army to implement and support, but for the right company is a great fit. Oracle has a lot of products out there. Microsoft, QuickBooks is something else that I'm going to talk about QuickBooks in a minute, but and then Infor, Epicor, Acumatica, there's all kinds of systems out there. And that's one of the things you need to think about when you're choosing an ERP software is the company that you're buying from. Over the years, I mentioned earlier that Oracle acquired Hyperion and PeopleSoft and JD Edwards, and those were big organizations. So when Oracle acquired them, they really allowed them to continue to function sort of independently. But there's a lot of smaller ERP firms that get gobbled up all the time, and then nobody invests in the product anymore, and they're just after the maintenance revenue stream. So you got to be really careful when you're considering different packages. You want to make sure the viability of the vendor is where you want it to be, because this is a 20-year decision. All right, so just some quick specifics around ERP, some benefits that you would expect to get from an implementation. Efficiency, productivity, I mean, all the buzzwords that you can imagine. Data integrity is a huge one. As you might imagine, every time we go in to do an implementation, data is, I'd say 99% of the time, one of the major problems. It's just everybody knows why. You know, you're entering duplicate customers, or you fat finger something, or you transpose some numbers. We're all there. We all know what it's like to consolidate all those things, and it takes work. The great thing about ERP is that it creates so much disruption that you can redefine all of that stuff. You know, it's really an opportunity for you to redefine what your chart of accounts looks like, for you to define how you want to store customers and report customers, how you want your order flow to be, how you want to manufacture certain goods. All these things can be really kind of step back, take a look, and say, hey, if I had to do this all over again, would we run this company exactly the same way? Because this is your chance to do it differently. You've got more access controls, auditing information to make sure that you can, if you do have some kind of certifications you have to get as an example. But these systems always track who did what and when. And most importantly, usually when people are looking at ERP, it's because they're growing. Our best clients are ones that have high growth and or have some level of complexity in their business, because that's where upgrading ERP really comes into play. If you're having a difficult time getting orders entered because you have a configured item, as an example, you're probably looking at upgrading. Or if you've got just a ton of volume that needs to come in, and you're expanding by acquiring new businesses that may or may not be in the same industry. I mean, all of these things have to come into play when you're considering an ERP. Because if you're making those investments in your business, you want your ERP to be able to sustain that growth and give you the flexibility that you need to be able to respond accordingly. And the last thing here is happier employees, not day one. Another thing I'll jump into here in a minute is this is not easy. I said that earlier, but I'm talking about from a change perspective. People are the most challenging part of these implementations, just like any project. But again, most of the time it comes back to communication and just making sure that you're staying ahead of what's going to impact them. How are they going to be trained? What are the changes on their day-to-day task lists that they do or don't have to do anymore? That's the kind of information that they really need. And fortunately, if once you get through that and you get a little bit of burn-in time, you won't be able to take it out of their hands at that point. But it takes time, and it is a challenge. Let's see, a couple of things, just some functionality. I mentioned this earlier, but really in ERP space, everything is game. So from accounting and financials to your inventory, to order entry, to purchasing, to manufacturing, to your e-commerce, any kind of digital business that you transact, to the mobile application that you use, all of these things can connect, interface, run reports, from one system. A lot of power in that, and a lot of simplicity in how you pay for that, both for the implementation, but also for it long-term support. All right, so if you are sitting here and say, all right, I mean, do we need to upgrade? Should we be looking at it? And the first thing I'd say is if you're asking the question, then it's probably worth looking at, because here are some common legacy systems that we convert people off of all the time. This is nothing against these systems. These systems, particularly, well, really all four of those, excellent systems for what they do. But at some point, you will either need to do some configuration or some kind of change that you just won't be able to do, because that's their power. You know, they're serving the 5 million, and they're able to really minimize the options around how to process an invoice, for example. And there's power in that because people just do it that way. But if you start giving them options, when you need options, it gets more complex, and that's where we come into play. And then homegrown is still a really common one that people are getting off of. There's still a lot of people that have been supporting the same system at their company for 30 years, and they're the only one that understands what it is and probably the language it's built on. So that's still out there and pretty prevalent. CRM is a little different. It's a piece of ERP, obviously. So customer relationship management, all of your prospect and lead tracking, your opportunities, all of that was within a CRM. And Salesforce, obviously, that's the big dog in the space. But people use Salesforce for so much more than just their CRM functionality. And NetSuite has a CRM. Really, all the major ERP vendors also have a CRM. But a lot of companies like to really specialize and get a CRM that is just built for exactly what they want to do. And so oftentimes, we'll run into these guys, and we might replace them and we might leave them. There's really no requirement. Salesforce in particular, we've done integrations to Salesforce data a lot. It's pretty common. And then business reasons to consider an upgrade is, first of all, you really, and the companies that do this and have been ahead of this for a long time and have stopped viewing IT as just a cost center. If you've gotten on board that you can really drive growth, I'm not going to tell you you're going to sell more stuff, because there's a lot more that goes into that, but being able to support the growth and the complexity that comes along with that, even around intercompany as you're buying companies and being able to do business between and among them. There's a lot of ways to really leverage a new system, and recognizing that it is not just a cost center. You might have configuration limitations. If you are high growth, like I was saying, new service lines. A lot of times, great example is manufacturing companies for years have been shifting their revenue streams to more service focus. Well, for a lot of businesses, when they have implemented a system that runs their manufacturing okay, it may not run a services business as well, but they need to be able to do that. And then we'll walk into a situation where they've got a whole new system running services and they're not integrated. And anyway, when you add a services service line, business line, it's much simpler to adopt those practices, even if they're completely different than what you already have in place. And then a lot of times we'll go in and talk to companies who have so much money tied up in their legacy system maintenance, whether it's hardware or software, that just doesn't make any sense to stay on that system. And they can actually cut a lot of cost by implementing a modern cloud-based system. All right, so now you've decided it is time to spend some money. All right, so first of all, how are you going to search? Well, again, as always, I'm going to encourage you to keep it simple. So you need to decide how you're going to search, what people you're going to use to actually do that search, and then decide, what is most important as you actually put that together. So a couple of options here. You can have your internal project team. You've got to make sure that the people that you assign to these teams are empowered to make decisions, know the business, can understand where the business is trying to go. These projects are pretty fast moving once they get going. And when you delay something early in the project, it kind of exponentially rolls downhill and creates these longer gaps once you get to go live, and you tend to forget about a lot of that stuff. So make sure as you are going into this, you're considering people for your team that are ready, available. You're going to have to remove some of their work off of their plate, most likely, but that's an investment that will make sense in the long run. The companies that do the best in these have people allocated. It can't be something you're just adding on to their normal 8-hour day. There's just too much that goes into it, and there's too many challenging situations to be able to kind of only do it half the time. You can also use a selection firm. There are lots of firms out there who do nothing but help companies select a software and an implementation partner. And a lot of times, sometimes that's a great thing, and sometimes it's not. We can also, as part of what we do is we have what we call a phase 0, and that's really a planning step before an implementation. And we go through like, all right, everybody cuts checks, but tell me the 4 or 5 things about your business that's very unique. What do you do? Maybe it's something in how you build your product. All right, we're going to spend time on that because that's what we really want to map and gap against the new system. So we'll help you kind of define some requirements and then put that out to bid to different software companies. But really, it's up to you how you want that process to flow. It can go, the selection process, you got to get comfortable with it. You got to be bought into the system that you choose. But how you actually get there is really up to you. So as you're looking at software, a couple things to keep in mind. First is, does it work in your industry? Depending on what your industry is, if you have a really, what we call a micro vertical, where you have a very specific niche within an industry, oftentimes there are small companies that have filled that ERP space, and they might do what you do really, really well. And those are worth considering, but you'll have to do an integration. Well, some of the larger firms may work in your space, but maybe not in that micro niche. And so, but those systems have the ability to expand or extend into that. So you can always develop custom solutions around it. And that's not a bad thing. That's actually part of what you should expect out of your new system, is that you have the ability to customize. And for a long time, that was a no-no. And there's a way to do that now, and it's fully supported by the organization. You need to make sure that it's cloud-based and multi-tenant. And the important thing here is you can be cloud, meaning that you don't pay for the hardware, somebody else is supporting it. But if you're not multi-tenant, you're not getting the power of the cloud. So in a simple terms, multi-tenant means that everybody that runs it runs basically the same set of code. We're all running this. So there's 2 upgrades a year, and it's essentially versionless, right? Because you don't want people getting in different versions, using different hardware, using different servers, all these different things that go into it. Because when you do that, you create a lot of complexity for the vendor to support all of those different options. I hope that makes sense. So when you have a multi-tenant solution, they're supporting one system essentially. That's it, because they all have the same operating system. They're all run on the same hardware. They all have the same configuration behind the scenes. So that multi-tenant capability is key to make sure that when you say cloud, make sure that's multi-tenant, because that's the powerful piece of it. And that's what allows us not to spend 40% of our time doing bug fixes and patch application. Resource availability, meaning how easily am I going to be able to find people that can help me support this system long-term? So if I'm implementing SAP, it's very easy to go out there and get an SAP resource. You may have to pay more for them. I don't know, but they're available. If you get to some of the smaller systems, you don't know where you're going to find those people, and that might be okay. You might just decide you want to build that in-house. Different ways to do that, but you do want to make sure that resources are going to be available. You don't want to be the only person out there, or a few people out there, and everybody that's running the system is looking for the same body. The vendor fit and viability. I mentioned the viability piece already, but the fit, the cultural fit with that organization is also important. Your relationship with their sales manager or channel manager, whatever they have. You need to determine what your selection and scoring criteria is. When you start going through demos, you're going to see, several different demos interpreting your business potentially in a different way completely, and getting to a common sheet of paper basically on how you see that demo and how people evaluate and score it is tougher than you might realize. So determining that up front not only will help you, but will also help the people that are demoing to you make sure that they're hitting on everything, because of course they want to hit on the things that you're going to be scoring. So it helps to put emphasis on the most important areas. And then finally, timing and phasing options is something else I would consider. So you're not going to want to go live with this thing all at once, most likely. You might, but usually there's going to be some phasing involved. And you want to make sure that the system that you're implementing has the ability to do that. Sometimes they're so tightly integrated that they're not really modularized and you can't separate them. So make sure that you can do that. You're probably fine in that, but if you have some unique timing or phasing requirements, you want to make sure you let the software and the services vendor know. From a services perspective, what you should look for, cultural fit is the number one. You're gonna be working, very closely with these people for the next 3 months, 6 months, a year maybe, and you want to make sure that you can get along with them. I can't stress that enough, because it is kind of like adopting them as part of your organization for a small amount of time. You want to make sure that they have the ability. These implementations are largely about business these days, not IT. So make sure that they've got the business chops to be able to back that up. And of course, they need to have technical expertise to help you through the implementation. Ongoing support, what are you going to do after the fact? So this isn't just a decision about how you get through the implementation. It's also what are you going to do with your business once you're done with the implementation? And really, you got to make sure that you find a partner that's able to support you that way. Because what you don't want to happen is you get through an implementation and all of that knowledge walks out the door. You want to maintain that relationship because they're going to help you identify, hey, all right, now that we've got that in, now that we're comfortable with it, let's stretch your legs a little bit and let's see what else we can do to take advantage of the software that we just implemented. And there's tons. I promise you that there will be a ton. But you got to make sure that whoever you work with is of the same ilk and can support you in those efforts. All right, implementation. Let's see. Okay, I'm doing okay. Expectations are key, no doubt about that. So these are challenging, complex. They can be sometimes scary projects, but they're worth it, right? And I mentioned this already. Quick decisions. Delays early tend to exponentially impact you when you get 6 months later and you're about to go live. So you got to make sure that's super important day one. How are you going to account for business changes during the implementation? I had a client a couple of years ago whose business grew 35% during the 4 months we were in a project. So just going into the project and then 4 months later, what we implemented and what we were supporting was kind of a different thing. And we had to really account for that as we went forward. You got to make sure your team not only can make quick decisions, but has the power and authority to make decisions. I mean, there's certainly things that are going to get run up the flagpole that need steering committee approval or somebody's, but they also need to be able to make decisions and know that they have support in making those. So I also mentioned the phase zero. What we do is we go in and really analyze, all right, what are you trying to accomplish? Let's look at those 4 or 5 areas that are the most critical for you. Let's look at your data. And then let's look at what kind of people you have to bring to the project. And that helps you kind of get to a planning stage. And you don't have to use us for that. Anybody can do that. But I think it's important to have that kind of baby step before you go full bore into an implementation, because you'll learn a lot, even if it's just a 1 or 2 week engagement before you get started. Billing options, milestone, time and material, those are pretty typical. Fixed fee projects. Everybody has their opinions on it. I would encourage you not to do a fixed fee project because you are from day one kind of putting, you've got different objectives with your client and your vendor at that point. So you want to make sure that everyone is targeting the same finish line, no matter how we get there. And sometimes fixed fee don't necessarily do that. But I've also seen fixed fee work great in the right situation. So it's kind of up to you, but you got to really manage expectations around that. How do you mitigate risk? Phase 1, my recommendation is mostly lateral. And what I mean by that is you're going to replace, let's just say you've got QuickBooks and an inventory system running. You're going to replace those 2 systems, and that's all you're going to try to accomplish in phase 1. You don't want to impact the customer. You're going to clean up a bunch of data. You're going to redesign your chart of accounts. You may look at a calendar differently. There's lots of things that you can do. You'll get lots of benefit from that. But if you go into phase 1 thinking you're going to have all the bells and whistles and everything, you're going to push a button and get an easy button that runs the business for you, it's just not going to happen. So really, if you will kind of tap the brakes around phase 1 expectations, get that thing in, burn it in for a few months, and then you're off and running. If you try to do it too quickly, people haven't learned, they'll go around the system. I've just seen that happen a lot. You can certainly do, you don't have to do this. You can go for it all, but based on my experience, I really encourage you to keep phase 1 as simple as possible. Do you really need that much detail? That's really around your data. Converting summary data is great. Individual transactional detail, don't do it. Forget about perfection. It's not going to happen. And really the goal here is to get as close as you can so that you can start running your business on it. And we'll get it really close, but there's going to be exceptions, and you can't manage the entire project by those exceptions. Also, make sure that you're celebrating those wins as you go. All right. So 3 project killers every time: legacy data, not enough training, and you're managing 2 exceptions, meaning that you are trying to create a new business process with something that happens once a year. And you've spent a day, I've seen this happen time and again, you spent a day describing this scenario and it happens once or twice a year. Can't do that. You got to get the 80-20 rule working for you and prevent some of those slowdowns. And then I got this valley of despair, which is this right here. And really the valley is, I love this slide. My salespeople always get upset about it, but this is, it's the stages of grief, but this is reality in an implementation. All right. When you go into it, you have that uninformed optimism and you are ready to go, but you will sink down into that valley, guaranteed, at some point. Oftentimes you won't even be at the bottom when you go live. But this is all part of the change management process, is making sure that you understand this is difficult. You're not going to like every minute of it, but if you can keep your eye on what we're trying to accomplish, you're going to be pleased in the long run. But it's, everybody says, oh, I won't do that. Everybody goes through it. I've seen clients take this graphic and put their name with a stick pin and then move themselves around on a daily basis. I've seen people build a little bridge across it saying they were going to miss it. They still fall in it. It happens. It's tough, but you'll get through it with the right help. All right, and then ongoing support. So we've gone live. Everything's great, but here's the deal. This system is still alive. This is a living and breathing thing that you need to be looking at as a long-term investment that's going to help you grow, and you need to treat it that way. You can't just put it in the corner and assume it's going to do fine. So don't lose momentum. I don't want you to start that next phase right away after go live, but you can be building lists, or you can start making plans of what you're going to do. You need to let the system settle for a little bit, because it's like buying a house. You build a house and you move in, and then a few months later you're like, man, I really don't like the layout of this. I wish we could do it a little differently. This is what's happening with the system too. You make some decisions based on the best thing, what you know going into it, but those decisions, they change over time, and that's okay. Phase 2 starts once the system is burned in, usually 3 to 6 months. It's not about bug fixes. It's about adding value to the organization. And maybe it's onboarding a new employee. Maybe it's creating a new report. All of those things are value add. And keep in mind, you're getting upgraded functionality every cycle that comes out when you're running a cloud-based product. So, lots of great new functionality to take advantage of all the time. All right, final slide here is takeaways, just some high-level recommendations. This is hard work, but 100%, it's worth it if you commit. You have to commit. You can't go halfway, because these things, once you've got it going, if you start stepping back from what you're trying to accomplish, it unravels quickly. So you got to be determined, and you got to move forward. Leadership and change management will win the day. It's all about people. Just like everything else in business, it's all about the people. The simpler the phase 1, the smoother the transition, for sure. And you can start data scrubbing tomorrow. I already talked about this, but the data is just, you're going to be pulling from multiple places. Don't get lost in all of the detail either. Really think about where you want to pull your data from, where the best source of data is, how you want to consolidate it, what your naming conventions will be moving forward. It's little things like, do you type out street, or do you just put ST? Those are the kind of things you want to think about when you're going through your data evaluation. And then the final thing I have is, if like I said at the beginning, I've got this book, Big Commitment, that is a business fiction around somebody going through an ERP implementation. Simple read. And if you can go to thevested.com/book offer, and it will be in what Leah sends out also, we'd be happy to send you a free copy, and hope you check it out, and happy to answer any questions. Got done a little quicker than I thought, but pretty close.
All right, guys. Well, we're going to open the floor to questions now. I'm actually going to kick us off because I have a question, but what are some of this might sound a little bit repetitive, but just the classic stereotypical signs that you see in organizations that show it's it's past time to implement.
Yeah, I mean, lots of manual processing. People, I mean, I just had a client the other day that they're getting orders off of the website on something somebody manually did, printing them out and then manually entering them in QuickBooks. And that's not uncommon. Lots of people do those kind of things. So if you're pushing paper around, that's definitely a sign. If you're spending an inordinate amount of time closing the books or these repetitive transactions that you have to do every single month, chances are those can be streamlined a lot. And there's ROI in that. If you think about what that person is spending and how much time, what they cost, there's real value in looking into that. So any of those kind of things, but I still go back to what I said earlier. If you feel like it's time, then it's time. It's time to at least look, because you don't really, because you're clearly noticing something that's driving that thought. So take a look and you might learn quite a bit about your business.
So then one other question I had is you were talking about how you can implement with something like Salesforce. How does that work?
Yeah, so basic integrations. So Salesforce is a funny one because the most difficult people to train, to get buy-in, to really do anything in implementation is salespeople. And I say that to a lot of companies and they all laugh because everybody knows it's
Byron.
true. Yeah. But the thing is, if you have a Salesforce that has adopted, or a Salesforce that has adopted a system like Salesforce, and they're happy and they're using it, a lot of times it's not worth the pain. Now, some people say, whatever, they're going on the new system. But if they've decided that they're going to leave it on Salesforce, yeah, usually there's a trigger. So as soon as you create an opportunity or a lead in Salesforce that gets past a certain score, automatically send it to NetSuite. And then it'll pop up in NetSuite, and then it's there from then on. Lots of ways to do that, but it's not an uncommon thing to do those kind of integrations.
Okay, we got another question in here. It says, is there a company size that you would suggest is ready for ERP, whether that be headcount and or revenue?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a tough one to answer because I have clients that are 5 million in revenue that require every bit as much attention as one that's 2 billion. It's really just what you're trying to accomplish. But in general, I'd say once you get over 10 employees, I shouldn't say 10 employees, but 10 people that would integrate with, that would use the system. When you get to that point, you're probably looking at needing something a little bit more revenue wise. When I put a list together, a marketing list, I'm usually starting at 5 to 10 million, depending on the industry. So that's kind of the bottom. But really, it's not even about that as much as is what are your objectives. Now, I've talked to lots of companies that say that they're pre-revenue to that today, and they're going to be 100 million in a year. I get that. Okay, good luck. But really, just be realistic about what you're trying to do in the next couple of years and whether or not your system can get you there. Because a lot of times, if you're that growth mindset oriented, it's probably not gonna.
Okay, so I have another question. Other than the people, well, I guess the people might be part of this, but what are the biggest challenges or snags that you see during implementation? Like, what are those roadblocks that you hit?
Yeah, it's still people, but a lot of it just comes down to what's going on in the business. Again, this is a Petra webinar, so this is all about people running their business more efficiently. And so, the clientele are more attuned to that. But you'd be shocked at how many times, or you wouldn't actually be shocked how many times I walk into businesses who they don't know what's going on, and they're somehow making money, or maybe they're not, but they really have no concept of process. And when you walk into those, a lot of times, unfortunately, if they've gotten to that point, they're not necessarily going to be open to a lot of change. And that's a lot of risk. If you start walking into situations like that, where you're not willing to really dive in and make those changes, it's going to be an issue. But you'd be shocked at how much, I've done it long enough now, doing a warehouse tour. You can learn so much walking into a warehouse of where a company is, whether it's how clean it is, how organized it is, are the bins labeled. There's just lots of things you can tell. So there's more, I guess, attributes laying out there that people can, I could watch, but if you're and identify that they need some help. But I think if you've got, transactions disappearing, can't make those kind of changes that you need to keep up, any of those things will really kind of trigger the need for a new system.
Okay, we got another question in here that says, how have you seen executive leadership teams really mess this up?
Just by not being vocal and not putting their stamp on it, because I've had clients where as soon as something goes poorly or something, the client doesn't agree with it, they go to their boss and their boss says, you got to change, meaning us. And it's one thing if there was a reason for it, but it wasn't. It's more about he's protecting his employee, but he's not supporting or championing or coaching us on how to get this thing implemented, because it's going to take the entire team on board. And actually, in the book, the storyline, I won't ruin it because it's a cliffhanger, but it is about somebody that's being a little bit mischievous in the business. So there's a little bit of a tie in there. You got to get everybody on board because it really will sink the project, and the executive team is doubly so.
Now, in getting everyone on board, do you find it more of a challenge to get the team on board or the executive team? Which one usually comes first, and which one's usually the follow-up?
It depends on how they made the selection. Usually the executive team understands what you're trying to do, but a lot of times when you get to the team that's actually going to do the work, they might not be thrilled if they weren't included in the conversation. That's sometimes, but usually the executive team is aligned. The problem with the executive team is usually follow through. They'll say the right things most of the time, but are they going to actually toe the line when they need to? With the team that's going to do the work, you really need to think about how you're going to motivate them. I've seen not stay bonuses, but project bonuses work really well. Or just something for the achievement at the goal line. But really what they want is to be included. They want to know what's going on. They want to know why. They want to know how it's going to impact them, and they want to have some control. That's fair, right?
So with that inclusivity in mind, that team mentality, what's the best way you would say to roll this out where a team doesn't feel like they were left out of the decision?
Yeah, when you go through the selection process, communicate that to everyone day one. I've seen companies really embrace that, have a monthly or weekly newsletter that goes out around what's happening in the project. So even people that aren't in the project, they are probably aware of it, and they like to know what's going on as well. Name the project, little things like that really goes a long way. Do some celebrations around it, really talk about it so that everybody understands the reason that we're going through all this pain is because we're making it better. We're going to be much stronger once we come out of this. And it's 100% true. There's a really good story to tell. It's just, you got to make sure you're telling the story, because a lot of times that gets shortchanged. Companies, as soon as they want to cut budget, they want to cut change management. And a lot of times that is the thing that will keep things moving forward, but you got to be intentional about it.
Absolutely. All right, I'm going to check Facebook and see if we have any questions there.
Oh, I'm huge in Facebook.
You what?
It's nothing. It's a bad joke.
If anyone else has any questions, go ahead and drop those in before we let Joel go. Like he said, I will be sending out a recap later today that'll include the resources mentioned. You'll have the link to get the free book and the link to rewatch this or to share it. I'm going to also be live on the Petra, or also live on the Petra website. And for more events and workshops, be sure to check out petracoach.com/events. We have a ton of exciting learning opportunities coming up, and we'd love for you to be a part of it. And if there's any other way we can help you guys or your business, drop us a line at info@petracoach.com. We'd be happy to help you any way we can. And Joel, I just wanted to say thank you for being here today. Viewers, thank you so much for being here today, and we appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Have a great day, guys.